Welcome, everybody, to New Polities Podcast on good money, the best type of money there is. And as Mark likes to say, the best type of money there is invested money.
I have never once said that, but it seems likely. We're talking about investments today. I have a difficulty in talking about investments, not because I don't really have any, but also because I'm good with the negative case for investments in a way. Like, for instance, you've given me this argument, and I found it very convincing that in our world today, through the calculated activities of the Federal Reserve, the stock market, and some other players, money basically loses its value. And so if you have money just sitting around in the bank, it's losing its buying power.
Yeah.
Don't I sound smart? Thank you. So investments, we're actually encouraged today, and I think maliciously in some ways, encouraged to get into investments to try and, instead of just owning cash, owning things that are productive and so can beat the wickedness and woes of inflation, etc. Devaluation.
Yep.
Yeah. But that's not what you want to do, because I think starting with that particular claim, like here's all the bad things that investment can prevent, is missing out on what investment is for anyways. Like, it makes it sound like it's just this rear guard financial technique that you can use, when money goes sour. But that's not, as I understand it, what the tradition says.
No, and it's
that's a softball.
Right. You got it. Ready? Out of the park.
Well, no, you have to hit it out of the park.
Oh, sorry.
Here it is.
I just kind of missed the analogy there.
Go ahead, hit it out of the park.
Well, actually, everything is grounded. The idea of investing is grounded in the virtue of beneficence.
Oh, yeah.
So when Aristotle actually talks about this virtue, which is rather an externalization of the internal virtue of charity, St. Thomas later clarifies. He actually makes the analogy between the creditor and the debtor, the one who is actually elevating the state of the other. He says this is a good analogy to talk about how beneficence works. And if it's also an analogy, then it is also the thing itself.
I've never thought of creditors as beneficent, so they might be operating on a different paradigm here.
Yeah, this is not like a bank loan type thing. This is somebody that is actually buoying up, lifting up, elevating the state of somebody else. And John Paul II is really the guy that gets this and puts it forward. Before we kind of like jump into it, I'll read his definition of investing really quickly.
Please.
And then we can kind of figure out the context in which he's saying this. So this is in Centesimus Annus, of course, everything's in Centesimus Annus, paragraph 36. He is here it is. He writes this. He says, to invest, that is, to offer people an opportunity to make good use of their own labor.
That's awesome. Literally no one thinks that.
So that's his definition. The way I like to summarize it is that it is a chance to dignify the labor of your neighbor.
That's amazing.
It makes someone's life better, because investment is based upon understanding money as capital in some way. Meaning that capital has this purpose in mind. Money, it operates the same way in productive sector as in an unproductive sector. It's just, what do you plan to do? How do you strategize the use of money so as to bring a profit at the end? That's money as capital. That's the idea. So within that understanding, we have to know that money is just an instrumental cause in the whole operation. Money itself is not creating the profit at the end. It is an instrument to enable it. The principal cause, St. Thomas tells us, and it's just kind of obvious, is actually the one that's thinking up the plan of how to execute it and then executing it. Right. It's the creative mind.
Well, the creative mind and then the laborer, I would presume.
Oh, if there is a distinction.
Yeah. Okay,
but you could think about something as simple as, I'm going to go down to the store and I'm going to buy some leather and I'm going to make some really cool sandals out of it.
Yeah.
But I need to be able to purchase the leather.
Yep.
And therefore I'm going to take this money of mine over here.
Yep.
And go utilize it. So then I can go buy the leather, make the shoe, and then sell it for a profit, well, that's still utilizing money as capital, and there's no investor-investee relationship in that. What gets really interesting is when you do introduce that sort of relationship.
Right.
That's what I'd say to that. But I think maybe one claim, I mean, probably a lot of people would say, well, hey, capital doesn't work like regular money does. And it really does. I mean, that's kind of like a strange thing to say, but as we're investing in this brewery or whatever, or the grocery box or whatever it is that's going on, we're making purchases in the same way we'd make other purchases.
Right.
Maybe not the same purchases,
Right.
but money still operates as a medium of exchange.
Yep.
I'm buying the fermenter. How does that work? Well, it's just I put the cash across the table and they come and bring me the fermenter, same thing, the oven, whatever it is. Money just has the same simple character in all of those situations. The difference between them is, what's my plan? Is there an overarching plan? Do I just want the lettuce, or do I want the lettuce for something?
Sure.
That's kind of the major difference that's happening.
Okay.
Yeah. And somebody might look at, their brokerage account or whatever and see, hey, look, the numbers are going up and down. Money's doing something. And that's not what's happening. It's at that point you've already traded money for something, and you're seeing it's the value of it going up and down, as being evaluated by the market at the time. Does that all make sense?
You had me right to the end, but I don't think the end matters.
No,
I think what really what matters is that John Paul II quote, in that I've never heard of investments as being for the sake of dignifying the labor of others. But it does make sense. I mean, when we have a duty on the one hand to give to meet people's needs, right? But on the other hand, if we were simply living in a world in which Christians were those people who just met needs, we'd be missing a whole part of justice. And I've seen this happen in towns where the Christian thing gets totally is devoid of any investing. So it's no longer seeing that as part of justice. Justice is just meeting needs, feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, all obviously commendable, gonna get you to heaven. Go for it. But the thing that misses is that man is not just an animal who needs his needs to be taken care of, right? Man is a rational creature who has a particular vocation, unlike all the animals of this earth, right? Which is to work. That is to take the creation as it is given and to turn it into a pleasing offering for God through his creative use of labor, through his reason, through his working on things and stuff. And we live in a crooked world where it's hard to do that. But it does seem like if the Christian is obliged to provide for man's body, then there's a real way in which he's obliged to provide for man's soul. And part of that must be the provision of opportunity for him to work, for him to fulfill his vocation as another Adam. I say Adam because it seems like the boys generally like talking about investing more than the girls. I don't know if you've experienced this. I just have never met a group of girls talking about investing, and I know they are obviously out there. So this might just be evidence of my narrow existence here in Steubenville, Ohio. But generally speaking, this seems to be something the boys are all about.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I bet if we checked our demographics, this one will be all the boys.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? Like,
sup, fellas?
You got it smells bad in here.
Yeah.
So the whole, you know what I'm saying? The whole focus of Christian life generally seems to be on these charitable works, where we're just giving money to meet needs of the body. And that's obviously a good, but it seems like there's this deliberate relegation of the Christian life to those kinds of uses of money, those kinds of activities, because they have a certain limited potential. It's like, well, Christians can kind of do that, and then you'll have conservatives talking about Christians basically doing the role of the state, like the churches take care of the poor, and then the state is everything else, right? And that seems to me to be kind of de-radicalizing of what Christ's teaching on money and the tradition's teaching on money really is, which is that it's not simply in your sort of charitable use of money, but in your just use of money that you are meeting the needs of persons and fulfilling them, which means that it's not just the businessman who's looking at his profits at the end of the year and wants to get he's got to pay taxes, so he's looking around for nonprofits to make some donations to, as if that was Christianity, right? It's
Right.
also the investments themselves. Are
Oh,
you
yeah.
dignifying labor? Are you serving the poor in that way? Are you giving them work?
No, it doesn't matter
It's
what.
inspiring to me.
Yeah, because it's still a matter of how are you using your money.
Totally.
Yeah. It's like in one cases you're giving to the nonprofits, great, but like how were you using your money? That's the major question.
As Job says to the Lord, will you not look away from me for long enough that I might swallow my spit? And that's sort of how we feel about money. It's just honest, How you getting it? How you spending it? How you keeping it? What you using it for? So
nice. Well, so I mean, one thing that's really interesting about this paragraph. Can I just read this whole paragraph and then we can like
Jacob,
go through each part?
I am here for sitting back and letting you read from encyclicals.
Okay, cool. If you don't have a creative idea, just listen to those who do, right? All right. So this is what JP2 says, the great saint. Wrong paragraph. All right. All right. So he says, it is not wrong to want to live better. What is wrong is a style of life which is presumed to be better when it is directed towards having rather than being, and which wants to have more, not in order to be more, but in order to spend life in enjoyment as an end in itself. It is therefore necessary to create lifestyles in which the quest for truth, beauty, goodness, and communion with others for the sake of common growth are the factors which determine consumer choices, savings, and investments. In this regard, it is not a matter of the duty of charity alone, that is, the duty to give from one's abundance and sometimes even out of one's needs in order to provide what is essential for the life of a poor person. I am referring to the fact that even the decision to invest in one place rather than another, in one productive sector rather than another, is always a moral and cultural choice. Given the utter necessity of certain economic conditions and of political stability, the decision to invest, that is, to offer people an opportunity to make good use of their own labor, is also determined by an attitude of human sympathy and trust in providence, which reveal the human quality of the person making such decisions. Boom.
A lot going on there.
Yeah, there's a ton going on.
I like his little side comment about sometimes you have to give charity out of your needs, not just out of your abundance.
Yeah,
it hurts.
It does. Well, this is kind of an interesting thing because St. Thomas, in his question on almsgiving, says, when have you given too much? And he says, well, you've given too much away as soon as you're no longer able to take care of those who are under your care.
Yeah.
But then he backs that up a little bit and says, well, sometimes that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just in the tradition, it's part of it. But the thing is that is really interesting is that is kind of the exception to the rule.
Sure.
The rule in this regard is that you give away your abundance.
Yeah.
No, that sounds kind of crazy. So let's show our receipts.
I don't know.
Thing.
All of nature gives away its abundance. It doesn't sound crazy.
Yeah.
I've been eating a lot of garden foods, I'm thinking about this.
Well, let me just read this off. All right.
Go ahead.
Here we go. Leo the 13th, Rerum Novarum. He says, quote, when what necessity demands has been supplied and one's standing fairly taking thought for, it becomes a duty to give to the indigent out of what remains over, end quote. St. Ambrose, quote, it is not anything of yours that you are bestowing on the poor. Rather, you are giving back something of his. For you alone are usurping what was given in common for the use of all. The earth belongs to everyone, end quote. St. Augustine, those who possess superfluities possess something else, someone else's goods. Gregory the Great, when we supply necessities to the poor, we return to them what is theirs. And then the 1996 Catechism, the big boy right there, says, when we attend to the needs of those in want, we give them what is theirs, not ours. More than performing the works of mercy, we are paying a debt of justice, baby. So that's why we say what we say, smack dab right there.
It's one of the most constant bells rung in the tradition is that if you have more than you need for your vocation, then it belongs by justice to the poor, not to you, because God gave everything to everyone, gave the earth to everyone. So if we are taking the world and then using it, privatizing it in a way in order to make it productive, than to simply take beyond what we need from that is to imagine that the world wasn't really given to us. Right? It's to lose the gift character of the world and pretend it's something it's not. So it's to start to lose touch with reality, which is why people that do it always become, well, out of touch with reality, it seems to me.
Right. And so this actually, I think, brings up a really essential question is then, well, if everything that is superfluous, that we don't really need right now for care of our bodies, or as Leo the 13th say, you know, fairly, one standing fairly taken thought for, you know, that how do we understand investment? Because investments, by their definition, are excess cash. I don't need to use that money right now to buy a tomato, right? You know, or food or bread or, you know, housing, you know, I can risk this capital, you know, that's the idea. So John Paul II obviously couches this, you know, dictum within that context of savings. He says, you know, this is, or excuse me, of giving to the poor, you know, not everything does, or excuse me, I mean, he's not talking about the duty of charity alone. That's how he phrases it, right? So that's the context. And he says, so, but what's the answer? And he says the answer is pretty much the same thing. What does alms giving do? Like we've talked about this, you know, it actually raises somebody's state up. It actually allows them to participate in your life in a sense, because the things that were defining, the defining features of your life, your wealth, your state in life, you're now sharing with them. You're actually entering into some sort of real unity at that point. An investment really does that. It binds you together. It forms what St. Thomas Aquinas calls a societas, which is a medieval term. It's a technical term for investing. We'll talk about that. But that term was also used to discuss a husband and a wife coming together in marriage. You know, or man and woman coming together and investing in marriage.
It sounds like what you're arguing is that investment fulfills that command to give our superfluities away. But I mean, and that can sound like maybe I'm doing a sort of sneaky loophole defense, right? Of like, you can imagine taking this the wrong way and saying like, well, I don't need to give to the poor. I can just have more investments because that's me dealing with my abundance, my excess. But it goes back to what you said with John Paul II's definition, which is dignifying the labor of others. If it's the case that what our abundance is for is for the sake of others, then it has to be the case that the primary motivation behind investing cannot be to simply increase our abundance. It has got to be a way of getting rid of it for the poor. That is to say, it's a way of taking that money that otherwise we're simply culling a certain part of the common creation and saying, okay, now how do I take this creation and make the fact that I own it for the sake of others? How does it become fruitful? How does it become abundant for others? So then you're making jobs, then you're making work, right? Then you're doing things that mean that other people advance in property and wealth. Right?
And this might kind of sound like a little Republican, you know,
a little bit,
you know, because, well, on the one hand, you have the socialist almsgiving thing. You just give stuff away, you know, which it's not socialism, but
I've never met a socialist who gives alms.
But it's kind of the giving away mentality.
They just give advice. They're like, sorry, bro, you should really rise up. You know?
You're like, yeah, okay, it's time for enough Xbox today, right? Then on the other hand, though, it kind of sounds like the investing thing is more of a capitalist, pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing. The difference, I think one of the differences here is that you have a real concern over the labor of particular people that you are investing in. Like you're not investing in a thing, you're investing in people.
Okay, but stop right there, because for most people right now, when they talk about their investments, they're talking about companies that they have they have some kind of maybe share ownership. And I know we promised before we started this, we're not talking about stocks.
That's next time.
Trying to make a positive case. I'm just more of a negative. I'm more of a negative person. Like If you ask me to describe like the glories of the New Jerusalem, I'll be kind of like, well, I mean, it's nice and everyone's happy. But if you ask me to describe like the wickedness of the pagans, I'll be like, all right, got 3 hours.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about their mechanism. There's something perverse there, I think. Anyways, it's the same with it's the same with this, where I want to talk about how bad the stock market is, but that's not what we're doing. But
maybe we should have gotten that out of your system first.
But to your point, though, the I think most people will think, oh yeah, investments. So I buy shares in companies, and you seem to be saying like, if the point is that it is a way of doing justice with our excess wealth, of turning it away from ourselves and towards others, then it can't be the case that our motivation is simply to buy its companies, things. That will simply, because then we're right back into the question of, well, how are we evaluating the investment? Probably on a return, which is simply more money for us, which means that we now have more of an obligation to invest. Unfortunately, whoopsies, you just had more abundance, so now you've got to do, and now you have to have more distribution. So it seems like you're saying that there needs to be a certain return to actually knowing that your money is putting people to work, that your money is dignifying their labor in a way that you can actually know as an investor.
Yeah, and I think the better the investment, the more personal it is in a certain sense. So you can have some sort of abstract knowledge that if I buy a franchise of this one company, whatever, and then people in the abstract are going to have jobs.
Yeah,
and the particular case of John Paul II and all his writing is this personalist approach of actually coming before another face, looking him dead in the eye and saying, I love you and let me dedicate my life to helping you, get to heaven and become virtuous. And being able to give a particular another person a really good job that will enable him to have more dignified and elevated work is going to be a path for his salvation, precisely because work was a gift that was given to man by God to help him work that out. And that's John Paul II's case in Laborem Exercens, with a kind of the encyclical that needs to go right next to this one.
Yeah, there's another part of the church's social teaching that you're kind of illuminating for me, because I've always found it otherwise misplaced, which is that the church is always concerned about unemployment. And to me, it always sounded like this odd, almost political concern, political in like the crass sense of like something that nations are sort of concerned with, that senators run on a unemployment campaign, or a desire to eradicate unemployment. It just seemed like, well, why is the church talking about this? This seems like they're kind of not out of their depth. It just seems almost like a non sequitur. But what you're describing is really, really helping, because it's certainly been my experience that not working is an evil. And that when people don't work, they spiritually suffer. And it's really fascinating.
And we all know this. I mean, it's like we all complain about the lazy kid playing video games in his mom's basement.
But I think we also just feel it ourselves. It's difficult now because we have made this... we've made making money and working synonymous when they're not, right? So you can have a job, especially within the white collar field, where you are technically making money by doing an activity. But if you were to ask, okay, but am I participating in work in the sense of adding my labor to the creation so as to make it a more pleasing offering to God, you would probably say no. Probably you're making the world worse in some little way. And at best, you're just not doing much at all. And so it seems like people have this idea of employment as if anything will suffice, right? So when we look at the problem of employment, we just say, well, let's just get jobs. But what we mean is, let's just make money, in some manner. But work isn't just like that, which is why investment needs to be local and concerned for what it's really enabling people to do. So that when you invest, it's to create opportunities, not just for people to work in the sense of to make money, but also in the sense of to be proud of themselves, to do something that benefits them, that tends them towards greater ownership, both of their skills, but also of property. Work that has an obvious effect on the common good. It brings the common good closer for the common, for the people. And these are things that you can't simply do haphazardly. Seems to me that the more in touch you are with the persons, the more you can know whether your investment is actually having that effect.
Yeah, that's
really
right,
dignifying work, and not
Mhm.
just sort of abstractly, keeping a business afloat and therefore creating jobs, whether or not they're good jobs.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And that's, I think, a big part of why investing today for Christians should be so important, because we have a lot of bad jobs out there. And I'm not just talking about, jobs that like abuse people, like in the old kids under the, industrial machines type jobs that are dangerous, but jobs that are more dangerous for the soul, that jobs that are not actually enabling people to utilize the creative capacities that God endowed them with and that he's calling them to
Totally.
utilize for their
I
salvation.
totally
That's it.
rather have my
Yeah.
kid crawling under sewing machines than an internship in like DC or something.
Yeah. Here, practice selling insurance for us. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a big concern, and why job creation, in a very Catholic sense,
Yeah.
it should be a focus on more, for more people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible the amount of money that Catholics have, locked away in so-called investments, but speculative investments, which we'll condemn next time, but not right now, that really could be going to other people that they know. But this is also a thing, is that to be able to give somebody a job in which they can truly be creative takes creativity to be able to identify.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah, like I think one of the things people are going to ask is, okay, obviously it is a goal of investment then to create work, opportunities for work, real work for people you know.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Mhm.
And that's why it can be a discharging of our duty of giving of our excess, giving of our abundance,
Mhm.
right? Because if it wasn't, well, anyways. But they're going to say, but that's not all investing is, because then it might as well just be charity, right? So
Right. Yeah.
you're investing in a brewery
Mhm.
right now.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's going to be awesome. Can't wait.
It's delicious.
But what you're not doing is just taking a bunch of money and giving it to other people and saying, please make a brewery. Okay. I'm not saying you wouldn't, or that would be something bad. I think that's a great thing to do. But in the end, that's almsgiving with a suggestion for its use.
Yeah.
So what I mean is you are expecting a return.
Yeah, that's right.
So that leads to two questions.
Mhm.
Okay. The first is, if there is a return, how does getting the return not sort of nullify the idea of it being a use of our money, right, for the sake of others? How do we not end up back in the same situation?
Mhm.
And then, well, let's start with that one, and I'll cross my fingers. I have this technique for remembering things.
Is it working? Does it work? We'll find out.
Yeah, I'm gonna cross my fingers. I have to look at my fingers while I cross them, and then beam the thing I'm supposed to remember into the fingers. Wait, here we go. Okay.
Well, this is a really good question. I think there's a lot of ways that you can invest in which you are actually compromising your friendship with people. And folks will say, yeah, of course you never, mix family and money or friends and money together. And that's not what I'm saying. I think that's very wrong. The point of money is to make friends. So obviously that's what you should be doing with it. It's more the case of, I'm not buying a brewery, is maybe that should be partly clarified, is that I'm not anticipating forever owning it.
I see.
Right. So when St. Thomas talks about an investor helping a merchant on his travels, he uses the term societas, I've already mentioned. It's a relationship between two people who know one another. It's used in terms of marriage, but it's also this technical term to talk about a joint activity between a tractor, the merchant who goes somewhere, and a stan, someone who stays where they are. The relationship there would be something like this. You have an idea. You want to go get wine from Portugal. I have some money that could pay for your trip down. You say, hey, could you give me some of the money so that we could do this together? And I say, yeah, sure. So I give you the money. You go down. You risk, your time, your efforts,
and nautical skill.
Exactly, to go down, get the wine, bring it back.
Yeah.
No, and then sell it at market. Raymond de Roover, who was just one of the great economic historians of the last century said it would be a mistake to think that the tractor, the Stans, the guy who stays, the investor, was a passive partner. He was active. Most of the time, he was a former merchant himself, who's directing the young merchant where to go, how to get his funds, get the wine, and then once he brings it back, he helps him sell it at market. So in a real sense, the investor was almost a mentor type. He was aiding the effort. And that's what St. Thomas is referring to. That's the technical term that he's utilizing in the Summa when he's talking about this investor-investee relationship. No, this is really helpful for us on a number of fronts. First of all, it shows that the investor is engaged, that he's kind of invested spiritually, in his spirit, and not just economically. It also means that he's, if he has any, insights, wisdom to share, he's imparting that. But, even more than that, something that's interesting to notice is that there's an end point to the societas. As soon as the last bottle of wine is sold, then the joint activity has ended. You did what you accomplished. And I find this relatively dangerous in the modern world because we don't really have endpoints to our companies. They are something that we invest in. I buy part of a company. Well, what's a company? What's a legal entity? Well, but what's that? We have this category in our modern legal system that makes it hard to translate into what it actually is. And what it actually is people working. Right. So if I'm just putting money into the brewery, the capital money to get it going, get it off the ground, and then holding it forever, then there's not a truly just percentage of what I'm getting, what I'm going to take out forever, because I put money in once, but they put labor in always.
No, and this leads to my crossed fingers, because what I was going to ask is, it seems it's always troubled me that with investment, there's some kind of priority in terms of return given to capital as opposed to labor. Because it's not clear to me why one should get a reward simply for having the money in the first place. Now, it may be the case, of course, subjectively, there might be a subjective situation where you worked really, really hard for that money, and so there's some sort of emotional baggage behind it. I'm giving all this labor to someone. But it also may be the case that you just got it from your mom, like Jeff Bezos did with Amazon, right? So, so my point being, it's like, what is the value of having the money to give in the first place? It's not to say, especially in the situation you described, that it's valueless. I mean, it is a gift, and in the societas, you're working. Your labor, sure, it's a different kind of labor, but you are laboring for the same profit as the workers, and you're helping them.
Yeah, your gain is their gain, your loss is their loss. You're actually unified together.
Okay, so I mean, now this is just great, because another principle, it seems to me, of Christian investing is that it has to risk a loss.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I know, but I don't think people think that,
right?
Because I think they I mean, especially with stock investment, but we're not going to do it. It seems like there's a lot of ways where we're trained to expect, and you probably know this, kind of from this world, that there are kinds of investments you can make where you're guaranteed a return even if the business or what you're investing in fails. Does this have a
kind of? I mean, the most risk-free investment there is a government bond.
Okay.
But that's a different matter.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it seems like you have to risk loss in order for it to be just, because that risk of loss is a sign that you're actually doing it together.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, a really important point, because a lot of people will actually say risk is a principle that justifies your return on your investment.
Okay.
So Samuel Gregg, really smart guy, used to be at the Acton Institute, no longer is. I don't know where he is now. Also an Oxford dude. He makes this point in one of his books, and it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what the medievals, how they talked about risk.
Namely, that risk deserves a reward.
Yeah, risk does not deserve a reward. For the medievals, for St. Thomas, for Peter of John O'Leary, these guys, when they talked about risk, it was risk as a sign. It was a symbol that represented something else that was the principle. And that principle was real ownership. So that when I give you the money, say, when you spend it, it's as if I spent it. When you expend it, it's as if I expended it. That's what's really going on. That's why they say risk really does have a place. It's a sign, but it's not it's not a sure principle. So
Totally makes sense,
yeah.
because risk is also very relative. It's like if you have, $100,000 lying around, you can say, okay, theoretically, I risk this. But the idea that that justifies a larger reward or a larger return
hmm
on the capital investment, as opposed to the profits that go to the laborers,
hmm
it seems totally arbitrary. It's like, why? Because that was really scary for you, like that you might have
Right.
lost it. Like, are we actually looking at risk itself as somehow accruing to more profits? That
hmm
doesn't make any sense. Whereas if you belong together within a communion that
hmm
you've created in order to attain a certain good,
Yeah.
then you're all risking. That's the point.
Right.
Like a risk is a sign that you've actually created a society, as opposed to just like manipulating people where there's no risk to you. I think
Exactly.
I'm following that.
Yeah.
It really makes a lot of sense. And I thought about this with regards to the brewery, because you've invested in the brewery. Um, but that question
hmm
that haunts my dreams, how do you measure the just return for a capital investment? I mean, I think about this all the time, but you know
yeah.
what I've come to?
It's arbitrary.
I think it's arbitrary.
Okay.
But now,
Cool. We're
when
on the
it's
same page.
arbitrary, though, because with labor, you can really, you can do math. You can say it's still kind of arbitrary in some ways, but you can make these decisions like, well, it's this much time. It involves this kind of education, this kind of training. I can put the factors in, the tools used,
Yeah.
and come up with some kind of idea of a just wage in relation to the need, etc. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the return for capital investment, it's like, well, you guys got to kind of decide something, because it's obviously a kind of work, but
Yeah.
it's not the kind of work where you can tally up your hours at the end of the day, right?
Oh yeah. No. It's
But this is really important, because I don't think that the fact that it's arbitrary means that it's somehow bad. I think the fact that it's arbitrary shows that it's supposed to be between friends.
Yep.
Because who is better at deciding arbitrarily than a group of friends?
hmm
Namely, you get a couple people in the room and you say, hey, I'm going to give, I don't know, $500,000 to this. And here's my family situation. And I really want to see this thing happen. How much do you guys think that it's worth? Here's my suggestion. What do you think? Okay. And then you come to a decision, you agree. I mean, a lot of the Catholic social teaching it has this very quixotic goal, which is friendship between the classes, right? Friendship between capital and labor. So
Yeah.
they'll do this sort of thematic move where the communists have this war between capital and labor. The capitalists have essentially the same thing. It's just that capital always wins the war. But here in the Catholic Church, we want capital and labor to just be friends. But it's like, yeah, that makes sense, because only friends can decide the worth of capital investment.
Yeah, and there's a number of questions that you've asked that I haven't really answered, and I think
I've got like all my fingers crossed.
Okay, one of them that's I think is really important though for us to discuss is that priority of capital over labor, and I have never really read a good answer to this question, but I have experienced it in business.
Okay.
And I won't go into all of it, but recently I was making myself a worse deal than what somebody else offered me.
Okay.
And he was kind of taken aback and said, well, I think you might deserve more because you've worked hard for that money and your trust really means a lot to me. And I thought that was a beautiful and honest answer. But the thing that he wasn't expecting was the fact that I wanted to like invest in him, and like I actively wanted that.
Yeah.
For him, it was something that he needed to kind of like pull. He thought he needed to like pull that from me.
Right.
And so his response revealed to me that understanding is that he that instrumental cause of big money was really what he needed to be able to make his dreams a reality. And he just wanted his dreams to become a reality.
Right.
And that he was going begging to somebody. And that's kind of how he felt it. And part of the way to help somebody who really needed to incentivize and change their mind was by giving them the better deal.
Gotcha.
That wasn't really, and sometimes, like people have ideas and they like say, please trust me with this or whatever, and you're not really convinced and whatever, maybe you take a risk for it. I'm not sure if I would do that, I really, but when there's the true wedding that happens where I really believe in you, I like what you're doing, you kind of, you're my friend, then things really start to change. The relationship between capital and labor can take its proper form. And the proper form of that, John Paul II speaks very clearly, and I think it's paragraph 14 of Laborem Exercens, is that labor is always a priority over capital. And it's not just the causality thing, though it is that, the whole principal cause versus instrumental cause. But it's really understanding that one is human and the other's not.
Yeah.
It's really comes down to the idea of why are we working? Well, we're working for salvation.
Yeah.
Who's the one that gets to heaven? Well, it ain't the dough, bro.
Well, it's like even the things we reward in capital isn't the capital. It's the work of the person who has the capital. You know what I mean? Like even when we say, okay, but why is this capital like, why do I get a return on just having this money? It's like, well, you say things like, well, I worked really hard for this money. Or you say things like, well, I'm really using my creative talents and skills to determine like which things to invest in, which things. So yeah, so you're talking about labor.
Yeah.
So it's like actually everyone knows actually there's a priority of, because they can only defend the priority of capital by talking about it as if it's labor.
Right.
Or where it really is labor. Those points of where it really is labor. That seems totally right to me.
Yeah.
You know what's awesome about Christian investing, or the kind of investing that you're sort of advocating, kind of closing in on, right? Because you said it's personal, right? You've said that it shouldn't expect, it should be limited, that it should form personal societies, communities of people who are all risking themselves, right? That it should prioritize labor, that is for the sake of producing good work in people. Our next podcast, Good Work. And it also seems like it's local. And I don't mean simply local in the sense of as if there is some merely geographic value. Like it's nice to have things around. But investing in the tradition is for the sake of the common good, right? It's, again, the difference is that it's just not for gain. You're not sitting there thinking, how do I money? I want a bunch of money. All right, I'll do investments. And then you're not going to go to heaven and Jesus is going to say, hey, good job on the investments. That actually has nothing to do with getting to heaven. So I'm not even going to ask you about that. I just wanted to say great choice in companies or whatever. It's like, no, he's going to be like, you took money that could have been for the common good and you used it deliberately for the sake of increasing gain. And any gains you made for the common good were incidental to your main drive. It was just this thing that kind of happened accidentally.
Right.
Okay, but in this Christian form that you're speaking of, you are a part of the common good.
Yeah.
And sometimes the reason people get so like upset about trying to find a justification for a return on capital's investment is that in a normal scenario where you're investing around you, the number one part of the return is the thing itself, the thing that's produced by the investment. What I mean is, if I were in your position, right, being able to invest in a brewery in some way, sure, I could say, yeah, it would be nice to get my money back over this period of time or something like that. And you can see how that would be just. But what you're excited about is the brewery.
Totally.
I mean, that's what you want.
Yeah.
And the point is, and you want people to be happy. You want your friends to have jobs and work. And so, and that is a return. I mean, it's the cheesiest part of the Christian tradition.
No, but it's the best.
But it begins right with Jesus, right? Like whenever he asks, he doesn't just say, don't do this, don't do that with money. Don't hoard, don't amass, just give it away.
Yeah.
He always says that there is a kind of hoarding and a kind of amassing you can do. It's just in heaven. So he'll say like, if you tear down your storehouses, give your everything to the poor, and you'll have treasure waiting for you in heaven. It's always, you know what I'm saying? It's always this back and forth. But it's cheesy, but it's true. Which is namely that like you it's not simply in the afterlife. It's also that in investing, you get the biggest return ever. It's just the return is real things and not more money. The return is businesses in your town. The return is happier people who have, ownership and greater use of their freedom.
Yeah.
The return is, it's the common good, but the return is just evident in your neighbors.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was, we were started. I mean, we've been kind of plotting this out for a few years now, and finally the work has like actually begun. You know, a few weeks ago. It's just so cool.
It is cool.
And I really had an idea. Like, I really wanted Dave Saison all the time. That's why I wanted, you know, to invest in the brewery. You know, but you know, after the first couple of weeks of seeing your brother, who's part of this effort, and a big part of it, and Dave, they're starting to renovate inside, and just seeing how happy they were.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it just blew me away.
Yeah.
Like, it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
I was like, no, that's why.
Yeah, totally.
I did this.
Totally.
You know, the Saison's just a really good bonus.
Yeah.
You know,
but the Saison, I mean, you don't snub it, because it's those,
amazing.
It's those kinds of goods in the world that guide us and say, okay, well, these are the kinds of things.
Yeah,
that
I'm not
I think everyone should enjoy. These are, you know. And I think that there's something so sad about the fact that modern investing, of which we will not speak in this positive episode, is money focused, because you make decisions on the basis of that return, and then you stop asking questions like, how do I want to live? Where do I want to live? Who do I want to be? What do I want my neighborhood to look like? Like, how do I want my parks to look? You stop being creative, you stop being powerful, and you start being essentially impoverished, in the sense that all you care about is the same thing that people that can't invest care about, which is money. So then your investing, it has nothing unique about it. It's just another, like, if it was something else that would get you the return, you would do that. Yeah.
So this guy that I keep mentioning, this Peter of John Levy, he wrote quite a number of things, but he wrote a treatise on poverty. Now, St. Francis, for those of you that don't know, put forward a command, actually, that said that none of his followers could even touch money. You know, I mean, it's hardcore, it's super radical. And Peter Levy, he wrote a treatise defending that and saying, why is this right? Like, metaphysically speaking, how does this really reflect the gospel? They weren't against like ownership, or, you know, in some metaphysical sense, but you know, the friars couldn't hold money. Now, was it a sin to do so? He said, absolutely not. There were some Franciscans that thought so, and they've been officially condemned by the magisterium, so they're wrong. But he follows up his treatise on poverty with a treatise on contracts, and particularly on investing. I mean, that's what it's the investing contract that he's really concerned about. And his argument really takes the shape that in some way there is a material parallel to the immaterial poverty. So in some sense, the vows that the monks take in some way parallel the vows that a merchant and the investor takes.
Okay, bold intro.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
You have my attention.
And the answer, in brief, I think we should probably do a full episode on ownership at some point, was this, that if you're holding all things in common, that doesn't mean that you don't actually have some sort of metaphysical possession of something. I mean, John Paul II makes this very clear in quite a number of his encyclicals, that there's some sort of metaphysical ownership that exists that's not just legal or juridical, you know, and it emerges through work. Is his answer, and that's just kind of capping off what the Franciscans thought about for so many centuries. And so you can say something in some sense is yours as a friar or as a monk, even though you can never make some sort of juridical claim to it.
Right.
On the other hand, the merchants and the investors, they can make some sort of legal and juridical claim to ownership. But when they actually come together in a joint activity, they all of a sudden have some sort of common ownership that parallels that of the monastery.
Gotcha.
You know, so they are entering into a return, in a sense, to a universal destination of all earthly goods-esque scenario. And returning to that is really where we're trying to get ultimately. And the more that we return to that as friends, the more freedom we find with those friends.
Right.
So I think that's a huge side of it. There's one other thing, sorry that I'm stumbling around here, I think that also is the key for understanding some sort of return on your investment.
Oh yeah, you never answered that question.
Yeah.
Why should you get a return at all?
Yeah. I think in some cases you don't deserve one.
Yeah.
You might say that this is um, a legitimate loan, but there is the response to a friendship always deserves a response. And the fact that my friends have said, we would like to give this to you in response for this, like, trust and dignification of our labor, has its place,
Totally.
and then all that money has to be used in the same way again.
Well, I think that's what it is, right? There's a successful investment shouldn't be rewarded in the sense that, the clever use of money makes more money. But the sign of a good investment, and ideally, is that you have successfully created work. And that means that you're probably the guy to do it again, right? And so the return should be seen as in the same way that the gift of money initially empowers people to work. In the same sense, any return should be justified as empowering the giver to give again, and to say, okay, because if it was superfluous, then it's most likely superfluous now. Now, obviously, there could be a situation where you become poor in between, and then suddenly it's taking care of your needs, and that's a different scenario. But it seems, generally speaking, the goal within the society is not that some person just ends up with money and then leaves. I mean, that's like a divorce mentality. It's like, how do I get the good and then get out of there? The question is rather, how do all people benefit within a society of investment? And one of the ways the giver benefits is by being able to give.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true, and it's what's really so sad and perverse about our contemporary scene. And when investment is impersonal and for the sake of private gain, what it means is that return is locked in these cycles of the people who are only doing it for themselves are the ones who are holding more and more of the world's wealth, which is just another way of describing our massive wealth inequality that we experience in the world today. But when you see it like this, it's like, well, but right, because these people are refusing to enter into societas with the world, right? They're refusing to really belong and to be part of a community in which can evaluate the worth of their capital investment. Yeah.
No, I think, if there's a societas that's formed between investor and investee, then there has to, even if there's not the same sort of distributive justice, charitable relationship happening with them as a collective and the customers that they serve, it still should be some sort of real good that you're giving them, and that just raises up the state of society, as you're saying. If I don't want to serve them bad beer, because that just makes me bloated. There's something about serving somebody really excellent, and that then almost makes someone feel dedicated to. I mean, we talk about haunts or like your favorite pub or some whatever else, your favorite company of some sort. You feel a sort of dedication to them, and just the more that can be a justifiable dedication rather than just good marketing,
right?
Wow. is really where we want to get to. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm convinced. I mean, I can't really invest much.
There's one thing that I promise, cut me off soon, but there's a lot of different ways that people could do this, like real practical steps, and there's various models that we've started to build out, and we're stumbling over ourselves, like trying to figure out what's the best thing to do, what's the best model, and trying to make corrections where we err, but I think one thing that a lot of employee-owned advocates get to is saying, well, how do I begin to, as the founder and owner, begin to divest my shares of the company to my employees? How do I sell it to the employees?
Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting thing, is that because there is a question of, well, why do you need to sell it to them? Is a real question that we have to ask. Is that really a matter of justice, or have they, through their labor, through their dedication to the company, through the fact that the company could not exist and do what it does without them, in some sense, justify a giving of the ownership to them. And that actually is John Paul II's argument, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
And I like, we can bring that out at a different or at a different podcast and read that through. But he really gives you two options as an owner of a company, is just giving, increasing employee ownership, or sharing the profits, in such a way that that recognizes their contribution to it for what it really is. So I think those are some questions that employee-owned advocates need to start to think through. So why, if we're talking about ownership from a more metaphysical standpoint, then there's some bigger juridical questions to ask about.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm cutting ahead and I'm not making a good argument, so we'll just do a whole episode on that. Yeah.
Do you think that do you think that investing in things for the sake of maintaining the value of one's wealth in an inflationary economy is just? Like, because I'm struggling with the fact that everything we've just said has been like, well, if I'm going to invest and I do an examination of conscience and say, well, what's my motivation? If I'm not turning up with, I want to dignify the labor of others, then I should at least be very skeptical of myself, right? In my desire to invest. But what about these situations where people feel like, and I think in some ways I'm skeptical sometimes about people because they're, so let me back up. Sometimes when wealthy people talk to me, it's like they're just about to become poor in just like a second. And they're like, oh, I've got to put all my money in gold, or I got to put it all in the stock market because the government is taking it left and right. And you can talk to them and think that they're just on the street tomorrow if they don't like quickly get into investments. I think this is one of the like weird moralizing scams that people go through, where it's like, yeah, I can see like the theoretical loss, not theoretical, like I can see how money loses value over time, but you're talking about superfluous wealth. You're not talking about the needs of your vocation, right? You're talking about a bunch of cash that is decreasing in value over time, right? So is it just to act out of that motivation and say, okay, I don't want to be a victim of inflation, therefore I'm going to invest?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And then, but I would just turn around and ask you a question. Why are you like saving? Like, what are you saving for exactly? And I think that's just one of these places where different answers will have kind of different answers from me,
What do you
in
mean?
a sense. So like if you are, if you kind of have a desire to, well, Leo the 13th talks about saving for the sake of procuring productive property.
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, you have a definite end in mind for what you're saving for.
Yep.
It's a classic liberality, the virtue of liberality. In that case, it really just depends on like how much money you need to save in this economy, how good of a job do you have.
I see.
But if you are, if you have like $10,000 or something like that in your savings, then you're not really going to be starting a company with that.
Right.
I mean, I guess you could find something smaller. Oftentimes, I mean, a big problem, Alice, my wife, she kind of has a problem with some of the investment world, even ones where you're like investing in people, is because it's like a minimum investment of $100,000 or a minimum investment of $500,000 or something like that. And she's like, nobody can invest. This system's rigged, et cetera, et cetera. But and I get that response. I understand it. I mean, but there's also just kind of the fact that maybe if you don't have money, then you're just not investing. Like,
Right.
then you're just, that's not your apostolate,
Right.
And I really think investors have to take their apostolate seriously. Okay. So, and not everyone has the same apostolate. So, I don't know is really the answer, and I'm just kind of fetching around for things. But if you have $10,000, you're not investing, in big things. You might be able to pool your money together in some things. But if you have that much money, you're probably saving for, a rainy day type thing.
Mhm.
That's your emergency fund
Mhm.
allowance, uh, and really thing that you're the thing that you're doing is working.
Mhm.
And if you can convince somebody, then be your trons,
Mhm.
like your investor, then that's the place that you probably should be in.
Yeah.
But it's like, what are you really afraid of losing the value of that $10,000 if it keeps changing because of inflation? Why not just toss an extra, buck at it every year?
Right. Right. Right.
Something like that, maybe. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. I don't have a good answer to that,
No, but
but
that
I
is
think
sort
that's
of
along the
what I
lines of how I start to think about it.
right. No, and this is what I become suspicious of
Hmm.
people who are in that kind of state where they're saying, "Well, I have to do all of these financial techniques. I have to invest." But their investments by nature become very dubious and without that kind of personal local quality because their motivation is, well, I just want to beat inflation, they say.
Hmm.
But it doesn't seem like it's the only way to beat inflation,
Hmm.
which is what you seem to be saying. That it's not just like if you have $10,000, it's not like the only way to beat inflation is to invest in companies, for instance.
Yeah, it's not. No, I
Yeah.
I mean, when you see like crazy valuations of gold or platinum or land or whatever else,
Mhm.
th- you know, the thing isn't changing. Like the 1 ounce of gold is still 1 ounce of gold. The
Mhm.
house is still a house. The land is still land. What's changing is the valuation of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so the question is, and based on the fiat system, which you do not have control over.
Mhm.
That's just one of those where you just have to say, I leave it up to the gods,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
sense, who rule over us in New York and etc. So, I yeah, I think there is some sort of just need of really collaborating with other Catholics that is just required to really beat inflation, and you beat inflation by actually binding together and owning things uh, in a productive manner together.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think that's part of it. But yeah, the rich person that's just scared of inflation is actually scared of his real apostolate, and that's investing. And when John Paul II, finishes off what he means by investing, he says that what you invest in reveals a human quality of your soul.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, that's really tough to swallow. And it's something that I've kind of been talking about this for a while now, but it's still like to this day, just like if I'm going to really put all my investments to the test and say, why am I doing this? What is being revealed by me putting money
Yeah.
here?
Right. Right. Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's what the Pope's teaching.
Yeah.
We got to be docile to that teaching,
Yeah, it's almost like
you know?
he's carving, we could let the theologians debate about it, but it's like he's carving out the place for investing itself to be called a virtue. Because when you talk about something as
Mm.
revealing the quality of the human soul, you're at least speaking the language of virtue, right? You're
Well,
talking about
I think he's putting it back into the historic category of the church fathers and talking about beneficence.
beneficence.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah, yeah.
already kind of a category,
But that idea
Yeah.
is the very fact that he could say that should show us how different our investing should be
Hmm.
from the world, because
Yeah.
what we're going to say is um, this investing, my investments, the sum total of my investments, if you go through them, show who I am and what
Hmm.
matters to me and what's important. Which means that apparently what's really important and what really matters to a lot of Catholics is Amazon's success and Alphabet Incorporated. So we're just really revealing how, unique, special we are. No,
Yeah.
of course we're not. What we're revealing is precisely what John Paul II says we will reveal, which is the state of our souls. It's just that the state of our souls is a sorry state indeed.
Right. And then the major question that comes after this is like, well, is there another option? And he actually has already answered that too. He says that investing is always a moral and a cultural decision. It's another way of saying there is no neutral.
Yeah.
It's always moral because, as he says, it describes the type of, well, excuse me, I should start with it's always cultural because when you invest, you actually build something up. You physically change the composition of your city.
Yeah.
It's different as a result. Now, when you build up a city, you're either building up the city of God or you're building up the city of man. It's either one. It can't be,
Yeah.
there was no third. And as a result, it also investing reveals itself to be a moral decision, because it reveals which city your heart longs for most.
Mm-hmm.
If you're building the city of man, then you want that more.
Yeah.
If you're building the city of God, you want that more.
You know, proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. Yeah, it's revelatory. And I think, one just a kind of last kind of thought is that investing, I think one of the signs that you're investing in a way that really does speak something good about your soul, maybe, I hope, is that you say, if this doesn't work out, it was so worth a try.
Totally.
It was worth the effort.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's great.
So maybe we shouldn't end there, but
yeah, no, I think that Christianity just lends itself to creating making the kind of people we knew were the heroes when we were kids. Right? The heroes are the people who make big risks, put themselves behind things because they're good and not because they're profitable, who sacrifice themselves, who look for others, who can look a bunch of money in the eye and walk away because they have something higher. Like, we all knew that was the hero. That's why he's the subject of all our movies. It's just that we enter into this world where then we have to trample on all that as adults and say, oh, that was kid stuff. It's nice for movies, but of course in real life, kid, you just follow the money and you get a good return on your investment, and then you die. So it's very
doesn't that sound great?
It's very heartening to hear from the church this return of adventure, of risk, of communion and society with others in order to better the world. Because what becomes an empty cliche in the mouth of the world becomes like a promise in the mouth of the church. Like, if we really believe this, we will make the world a better place, right? Like all those lame things that we hear all the time, but in fact should be our real motivations for investing it all. And I really like that I should affirm you, because I think it's such a great thing to say that you're not necessarily supposed to invest.
Oh, man. Mm-hmm.
Like, sometimes you're just supposed to blow it all on your vacation. That's it. I mean, maybe if you end up with a windfall or something, a dead lost great aunt or whatever.
Yeah. Or the work is really good and you're getting compensated well.
Yeah, just way beyond what you thought.
Yeah,
sure. But like, man, if all you have is like a house and a family, and you're starting to look at excess money, I think that your first step should be, okay, how do I make my land productive? Like, how do I give gifts to my neighbors?
Yeah.
How do I, it's not, okay, now I've got to avoid inflation and put some money in Bitcoin or whatever. It's like,
bad move.
That would be, yeah. But I think that's very freeing, because I think increasingly the rhetoric from people as the world becomes more and more financialized is that there's something like irresponsible about a life that doesn't take these sort of investment things seriously. But when you describe it as a vocation and a particular calling that comes with essentially having a bunch of money, it's very helpful, because it just knocks out a whole character type, which is like the striving young poor investor type who is very obnoxious, and it just says, yeah, don't do that. So maybe people will like that, maybe they won't, but I like it.
Yeah, well,
I'm here for it. I'm here for you telling me I don't have to do more work.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's really bothering you, and I mean, obviously the answer to everything is like, go be honest with yourself in front of Jesus in the Holy Sacrament, right? Like, go to adoration and say, Jesus, why am I feeling like this? Am I like, and maybe part of the answer is that you really do have a toilsome job and it's not a good one. And at that point, pray for an investor to come along, or at least pray for a good boss who's doing good work that will hire you. Look around for that. The Father, it's known for giving good gifts. He's the first benefactor. But I really think it has to be like an honest prayer, and a lot of us are still trying to get to know ourselves, and what are the secrets of our hearts? What are the desires? If we had money, what would we really invest in? What's the quality of our souls? And we just try and keep getting better and praying for sanctity, and we'll get tossed around along the way, and hopefully there's some things that happen that are good.
Totally, dude.
Like salvation.
Like one of those things. All right, well, there you have it. Go reveal the qualities of your soul, the good qualities of your soul, by your investments. By your fruit you shall know them, and by your investments too. Their investments too, apparently. So we're going to do more on this, and then we're also going to talk more specifically and maybe more heatedly, at least for me, about various ways that we avoid what seems to be the calling to distribute wealth through the means of investment, and how we have a lot of things that look like investment, that feel like investment, that kind of have the language of investment, but in fact are not, that are the sordid seeking of private gain, of which so many are about the business.
All right.
Next time.
Later. Till then.
All right. See you, everyone.